phone went bing at me, man. Here. Hi, how's it going? All right. There's no evidence for God. Thinking Christian is doing a video called "Is There No Evidence for God?" This video that you're now listening to is a response to that video. Now, his video is 18 minutes and 59 seconds long, and according to my math, see, that will only take me 20 days to respond to. So buckle up tight. It's going to be a long ride, but we're in it together until the very end. Now I have to stop whenever he's wrong, or I have to insert something, or respond. You know how this works by now. I have to point out logical fallacies. If I don't start now, we'll be here for like 21 days instead of 20. So anyways, all right, here we go.
Hey everyone, this is Paul from Thinking Christian, and what I want to do in this video is address the question that's asked, or maybe respond to the statement when people claim there is no evidence for God. What I want to do is give a response. So what's the deal here? I mean, I hear this all the time, even in the comments of some of my own videos, and I don't claim this is going to put this issue to rest entirely, in part because pretty much no one's heard of my channel, but at least I will have given a response. So I will feel better about myself for having given this response, right? So let's define a few terms here. We need to know what evidence is and what God is. So what we mean by God, let's just take the traditional Judeo-Christian God. So we're not playing these games of, oh, God could be defined as anything, and then you can kind of get out of that way. I think that's that's kind of like cheating. So let's just take an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God, like in the Judeo-Christian God.
Hey, I'll give props where props is due. You know, too many apologists out there will just say God and leave it as some sort of vague term, idea, loose concept, or they'll go with a natural theistic God or something like that. So I appreciate that he's trying to narrow down that by saying Yahweh, which is what he's basically saying. Yahweh, Jehovah, El Shaddai, or Christ, I suppose. He says love. You know, he fleshes that out just a little bit by saying, you know, all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God, because there's different concepts of God even within Christianity. I don't know if that narrows it down enough, but at least it does a little bit of narrowing down, and so that's good. And yeah, good times. And I'm gonna eat my phone if it bings at me one more time. I'm not used to having a phone that bings at me. Okay, anyways, all right.
Christian God. And let's look at evidence. This is where it gets to be a little bit interesting. We need to look at what the definition of evidence is. What do we mean, right? So Merriam-Webster defines evidence in a couple different ways. Talks about an outward sign, something that furnishes or who furnishes proof or testimony, or something or someone that bears witness. So they're kind of these different definitions for what it means. I don't really like the word proof. Part of the reason is in my field, in mathematics and engineering, when we say proof, we actually mean something pretty analytic.
You know, it's great. Again, props for props due, using a dictionary to define terms. Now, you got to be careful there because there is a logical fallacy appealed to definition. He's not doing that fallacy, by the way. If you're not familiar with that fallacy, we'll go look it up. No, so so the appeal to definition fallacy is also an argument from dictionary. It occurs when someone's argument's based on the definition as it appears in a single dictionary. It's like, this is what it says, that's what it means, that's what it is, end of story. Quite some time ago, I analyzed Steve McRae's argument for what the word atheist is, and he ran really close into making this fallacy in his argument. He didn't actually commit the fallacy, but he was real close to it, because he was using a particular definition of atheism, and he wanted other people to use it. And because he was attempting to do a prescriptive argument, he didn't actually commit the fallacy, but he got awfully close. But at any rate, so that's the appeal to definition. And if he's not careful, he might actually commit that fallacy. I also like that he's saying, proof can mean a number of different things. And in mathematics, it means one thing. In informal logic, it also means something too. So I deal with informal logic. That's my thing. I don't know that I could call it a field because I'm an amateur logician at best. I haven't been paid for this yet. If you want to pay me for doing logic, then great. I can call myself a professional finally. But at any rate, the word proof in informal logic terms means you would have a valid and sound argument. But evidence is one of those natural language terms. So he's using all of these as what he means by evidence. It would be better if he could narrow it down because you still have some room for vagueness there, and make the word less naturalistic, make it more artificial. Say, I mean X when I say evidence. So I'll do that for myself. Whenever I say the word evidence, I'm referring to empirical evidence or a repeatable test. That's what I mean when I say the word evidence. So now you would understand if I use the word evidence in any essay or argument that I mean empirical evidence, repeatable test. So I don't have to say empirical evidence, repeatable test every time. I can just say evidence from then on in that essay, and you would understand that I meant these grouping of other words. But okay. So yeah, again, props where props is due. I'm glad that he defined evidence to be an outward sign, someone who furnishes proof. Testimony, I'm not sure about that, but okay. Something that bears witness, I'm not sure that that's evidence and that I would accept, but it depends on what it is. And okay, so we'll see.
Something that you don't really get in science. So I try to avoid using the word proof as opposed to just evidence. In that sense, if we require proof as evidence, then we can say we can't prove the world isn't an illusion or a dream. We can't prove that we're not living in the Matrix, but perhaps we could still argue that we have evidence that we're not, or maybe not. I don't know. So I want to offer 5 things that typically count as evidence, and this is no way an exhaustive list, but it's at least getting you in the right headspace. The first thing is mathematical or logical proofs, and this is what we actually mean by proof, things that are proven using the tools of logic. Then we have scientific experiments. We have logical or rational arguments. So these aren't.
He already went off the rails. I don't know where he comes up with this idea of these things that count as evidence. These are obviously things that count as evidence to him. I do not agree with that list because a logical or rational argument, even one that was valid and sound, I wouldn't call it evidence. And here is why. If I go to the bank and I make a valid and sound argument about having a large sum of money, I'm going to say $1 million because why not? I have $1 million in that bank and I make a argument for that. Is the bank teller going to need additional proof, or is my argument going to be enough to satisfy them in letting me withdraw a large sum of money? Now, you couldn't withdraw $1 million even if you did have $1 million in your account because no single bank carries that much money. But you could withdraw a significant amount, like $10,000 probably. I don't know what their maximum is. So let's just make it a reasonable amount. Say I have $20,000 in my account. I'd like to withdraw $10,000, please. Here's my valid and sound argument. Either I do have that amount in my account, or the bank is not open right now. But the bank is open right now, so then I must have that money in my account. So please give me that money. And you don't need any evidence of who I am or that I have an account at this bank because I gave you a valid and sound argument. Would you accept that as evidence? No, of course you wouldn't. You would require me to show you an ID. You would require me to show you a bank card. You would require to know what my account number is. You would require all sorts of information. Of course you would. because we require actual evidence, and an argument is not evidence. I do not know why theists tend to think, and it's like many, many apologists that I've heard, I can't say all theists, I say broadly speaking, tend to think that arguments are evidence. They're not
necessarily proofs in the traditional sense, but they are arguments for a position. And you could argue this counts as evidence. If I offer a good explanation, this is an evidence for that claim being true. You have personal experience.
I don't count that as evidence either. At least if we're talking, depends on what we're talking about. But I would count it as the lowest form of evidence. I wouldn't even call it evidence, because if it's something that you experience that nobody else can experience, then that's not evidence. I can't analyze that. I can't do anything with it. You might be telling the truth, you might be making up a story, and if I have no way to verify it other than you just said this or that happened or didn't happen or whatever, even if it's a mundane claim, then I might grant it because of social norms. Say, hey, I had dinner last night. Okay, sure. I wasn't there to see it, but yeah, people have dinner. If you say, I had dinner with the president last night, well, okay, that's a bit of a bigger claim that you've made there. What do you mean? What, the president of the United States? No, the president of my company. Oh, okay. Well, that's a believable claim, but no, yeah, I meant the president of the United States. Well, now I'm going to want some sort of proof about that. I'm going to want some sort of evidence to that. Well, I can't, I didn't record it. I didn't take any pictures. I didn't get any signed autographs. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. I'm like, well, I don't. So that's that, and that's it. I'm not going to say that they're lying, but I don't know that they're telling the truth either. So I'm going to hold that in a super suspension of neither I believe it nor do I disbelieve it, but I am what I call skeptical of it. But yeah, personal experience is like way, way, way down there, and testimony of others or testimony in general, unless there is backed by something, I wouldn't even consider that evidence like at all either, because people can make up stories. So you can get a group of people together to make up stories. I could get enough of my friends on YouTube to come together and all make a video where they all agree that the lobsterist is indeed the actual real truth, and that everybody should follow the lobsterist. If you don't know what I'm talking about, on my profile, there are 4 lobsterist books to read. If you haven't read them, then you're missing out, but they contain the true knowledge of the lobster deity, the original deity, the only true deity that exists. And the 4th book even says that it's true. So how can you show that it's not true? So yeah, I could get in a lot of people to say anything. So testimony is just not even evidence for me. For him, it might be enough, but not for me.
And then you also have the testimony of others. And some of this evidence also would count maybe in a legal sense too, right? When you say, okay, well, what evidence does the prosecution have that this person is guilty of a crime? Maybe they will bring someone to the stand who was a witness or somebody who saw the crime for themselves, these sorts of things.
I have heard it said a couple times that God is guilty of not existing. And it would be interesting to see God put on trial by lawyers who actually wanted to do that, an atheist lawyer and a theologian lawyer. I don't know what, I imagine they'd probably be Christian, but they might be Hindu or something else. I don't know. And to have, it'd be interesting. You'd have to have a jury of half theists and half atheists, I suppose. But you couldn't call God to the stand, so that would be a significant problem. I'm not sure if you could construct even a mock trial of this nature. I'd love to see it done, though, because apologists do like to bank on our limited knowledge of how legal trials and law works to be like, I have witnesses. You call witnesses in trials, right? You're like, yeah, well, but that might be just because we're limited beings and maybe that's all we have sometimes. But would a lawyer allow their client to take the stand if the client was going to tell the story about how they couldn't possibly have been the one that did the crime because they were abducted by aliens, unless they were going for like a insanity plea or something? I don't think that they would the court really allow testimony about Bigfoot coming down from the mothership, that the Bigfoot was the one that robbed that liquor store that night? We don't have any footage of it, but we've got all these people that say that that's what they saw. Yeah, I mean, would that really work in a court of law? I don't think so, because it's such a bizarre, non-mundane thing that it would probably be tossed out, even if it was a mock trial. But I'd love to see it done someday.
And because there are examples of each of these that are used to argue God's existence, I think what we really have to say is, for the person who's claiming there's no evidence of God's existence, they basically are either lying, ignorant, or they think all such arguments fail. And if
I love when people just have to toss in some poisoning of the well there. Yeah. No, you must be lying or ignorant. Poison the well, poison the well. Or well, you think the arguments fail. Well, then no, because if they do not view arguments as evidence, then no to that. See, you've shifted everything. You stopped talking about evidence, and you're talking only about arguments, which I don't view as evidence. Arguments are not evidence, as I covered before. Now, he might think that they are. He might accept arguments as evidence. Maybe I could say to him, hey, look, either you've made a video called "Is there, quote, no evidence for God, end quote, question mark," or you don't owe me $1,000, but you did make that video, so therefore you do owe me $1,000. Well, I've given you evidence that you owe me $1,000, so when am I going to get my $1,000? I expect payment. I've got PayPal. You can maybe you can just buy a bunch of my books, and that will even it out. If you buy $1,000 of my books, A Copy Between Infinite Hope, Finite Despair, and The Lightbringer, you can just hand those out at church or something. I don't know, but yeah. Well, no, that's not evidence anymore. Yeah, of course not. But yeah, no. How about if an atheist claims that there's no evidence? Maybe the atheist is saying that they don't know of any evidence at all. And maybe that's just their honest assessment of it. But no, let's poison that well. But I could do the same for the theist. The theist that claims that there is evidence for God is either ignorant or lying, or think the arguments are amazing and awesome and work because they don't understand informal logic, obviously. Duh. I mean, if they understood informal logic, then they wouldn't think the arguments are any good. And then they'd say that, yeah, of course there's no evidence for God. In fact, you could make an argument that is Christian in nature that says there can't be evidence for God. Because if there was evidence for God, then you couldn't have faith. And without faith, it's impossible to please the Christian God. So you can't have evidence. Because if you had evidence, then you wouldn't have faith. So God has to put little hints, but it can't actually put any decent evidence out there, because you have to have faith. And so you couldn't have evidence. See? Oh, okay. Anyways, yeah. So but yeah, when I say there's no evidence, again, because when I say the word evidence, I mean empirical evidence or repeatable test, I am correct by my version of the word evidence. Typically, I try to remember to type out empirical evidence or repeatable tests every time because, again, ambiguity of natural language. And I'll say, hey, as far as I know, there's no empirical evidence or repeatable test about God itself, the phenomenon Yahweh. There's no way to empirically verify that. Not something that points to it or hints to it or sounds a little bit like, no, the thing itself. Okay, and if there is a way to see that, to visualize that phenomenon in some way, shape, or form, then let me know what that is and how to do that. If there's some way to test that phenomenon, great. Let me know what that test is. Let's see if it's repeatable and scientific in nature. We could, test it over and over again, okay? And in fact, interestingly enough, in the Old Testament, there is a test that God provided for people. Yahweh allowed a test to happen between Yahweh and Baal. And if God never changes, then God should be okay with that test being done today. And we should see the same exact result happen today as it happened way back when. Well, do you want to put your money where your mouth is and do that test and show that Yahweh is still just as powerful today as he was way back then? No. Why? Well, because you know the test is going to fail. You know that it's not going to happen. You know that no amount of prayer is ever going to light the sacrificial altar on fire like it did in the Bible story. You know that. Absolutely, you know that that's the case because you know that God is not testable. And you will find some loophole that allows you to excuse why God allowed the test to happen back then, but he won't allow it now because of whatever finagled reasons you can come up with that I wouldn't accept. But at any rate, I'm way off track now, perhaps. Well, I'm not way off track, but otherwise, I guess I'm a little bit irritated because he poisoned the well and stopped that. Yes. Oh, but yes, the argument. So yes. I love to say I type the comment many times in many videos that I don't bother doing a response to. I'll say, oh, by evidence, of course, you mean bad arguments because I never see evidence. I only ever hear bad arguments. So yes, all the arguments that I know about, now I can't say all arguments, period, because I don't know about all the arguments, only know the ones that I know about. All those arguments indeed do suck. They fail on logical levels, scientific levels, in some cases theological levels. If you care about such things, I really don't, but I can point out when they do on a Christian perspective and be like, yeah, that fails like on a theological level. That's rare. That's more rare that happens, but it does happen. Although it depends on your theology, of course. But yeah, they all the arguments that I know about concerning God suck. They all fail, logically speaking, or scientifically speaking, or both. So yeah, but also arguments aren't evidence. So not only is there no evidence, but the arguments also suck. So your false trichotomy here failed.
If there's another fourth option, perhaps, you could add that to the list and we would consider it with these other ones. So even though I'm inclined to think that the first two play quite a bit of a role in a lot of people's thinking, let's just put those aside and look at the claim that all such arguments fail, right? Because if the person who's claiming there's no evidence for God is lying or ignorant, then we can just dismiss their claim. But if their claim is there's no evidence for God, really what they're claiming is that all arguments for God fail. And not only do they all fail so miserably that none of them give any evidence to the proposition gods exist. So none of them provide a single amount of or a single shred of evidential support to the proposition God exists. And that's different than just claiming, oh, I find these arguments unconvincing. Or
it really isn't, though. If you're doing informal logic properly, which you might not be doing if you haven't, read a book or two on the subject. I don't know. Or maybe you did, but it's been a while. I like to reread logic books every now and again to keep myself sharp. I like to take informal logic tests and make sure I'm, on the ball, because I get things wrong. We all get things wrong. It's possible. It's probable. It could happen. I'm not wrong ever, but whatever. But at any rate, no, of course I'm wrong plenty of times. But no, if the argument fails, then that's it. The argument fails. There's no gradient. There's no this argument fails more than that argument. If you have one logical fallacy, that's it. You're done. Back to the drawing board. Go fix your argument and come back with a new revised argument. So, Kalam. Somebody brought up the Kalam. I have a whole video on the Kalam called the KCA. The Kalam's a great example of an argument that needed to go back to the drawing board, but for whatever reason, the apologist refuses to take it back to the drawing board. It starts with a number of fallacies, but starts with the assertion that all things all things that come into existence are caused. There's different wordings that are out there available for that first premise, but that's good enough. Well, that's already a problem, ignoring any other fallacies that are attached to that first premise, because you've just done a superlative. Oh, my brain always wants to say superlative. That's not a word. Superlative. You used the word all or every, always. If you none, nowhere, never. Those are all superlatives. Okay. So within informal logic, if you use the word all, you're referring to like all of the universe, essentially. So take a classic argument, all men are mortal. Okay. This argument can only stand because we know that all men are indeed mortal. And we know that through demonstrable evidence that we could bring to bear if somebody dared to question that statement. When it comes to the universe, however, if there's human life out there somewhere that isn't mortal, well, there's nothing we could really say about that, but we're assuming that humans are here. So it and that works well enough. But when you say all things that come into existence are caused, well, no, you can't say that honestly, because you could only talk about the things that have been observed by humanity. So you should say all things that humans have observed thus far appear to be caused. And maybe you want an additional caveat in there, except maybe that thing in quantum physics where they put the plates together and the particles do stuff. I don't know, but they don't want to rewrite that first premise to change it to be more honest for whatever reason. Anyways, a nice little tangent to go on. But no, there's no strong claim here. Your arguments suck. All the arguments I've ever heard for God suck. It's not a strong claim. It's my claim. I'm happy with the claim, but there's no level of claim needed here. But that's useful for his narrative to claim that that's the thing. Okay.
I'm personally not convinced. You're actually claiming, when you say there's no evidence, there exists no evidence, that every single argument fails so miserably that they don't work at all. And I want you to appreciate how strong of a claim this is, because this is a very strong claim, and one that we need to make sure there's evidence for that claim, because that claim is a claim in and of itself that needs to be supported. So the thing I want to say is to the theist who hears this claim, all evidence for God fail.
Now, you might not have noticed it, but you're all pretty smart, so you probably did. You'll notice how the claim has shifted from, there's no evidence for God to all evidence for God fail. And what we mean by evidence is actually argument, because we've equivocated the word evidence to be argument. So really this should say all arguments for God's fail. But again, I would be careful with that if I was to say it, because I don't know about all the arguments. I can only talk about arguments that I have personally observed, that I've read or heard. So all arguments that I'm aware of for God have one or more logical fallacies. And yes, I've analyzed them all. The ones I've seen or heard. I can't obviously talk about ones I've never heard or seen about, right? So I can't say all. But again, whatever. But yeah, no evidence for God's existence. And well, what do we mean by evidence? Are we talking about arguments? So the claim there is no arguments for God's existence, or is it evidence? Which version of evidence do you mean now? See, you did define it a while ago, but you're changing what you mean by evidence, so it's equivocation all throughout, and that's a problem here. So tell me what you mean by that word. Use a different word if possible, because you don't mean evidence anymore. At least not most of the evidence. You actually mean arguments at this point, and I think that that's pretty darn clear. Because if you'd had a mathematical proof, or what are the other things he had? Outward sign. Let's see, something bears witness, something for just proof, testimony. He didn't like the word proof. Oh, okay, here's the list. There we go. So if you had mathematical or logical proof, you would have given us that. If you'd had scientific experiments, you would have given us that. If you had a logical or rational arguments, which is, I don't know why you'd separate logical proofs. I guess he means mathematical logic here in number 1. So I would say informal logic here, or formal logic, to separate that from mathematical logic. So he would have given us number 3 if he had it, right? So he's obviously he's going to give us that, right? He's got to give us that, because he haven't given us 1 or 2. And 4 or 5 don't count, but I'm guessing he's going to give us that as well. So, but he doesn't have 1 or 2 for sure, and that's the only thing for me or 1, 2, or 3. But 3 isn't evidence. So, so 1 or 2 would be evidence for me. And then, so when he's complaining that all evidence for God's fail over here, that's still true for me, but not for him, because what he means by evidence is something different than what I mean by evidence. So he's no longer talking to me, he's talking past me, and he's equivocated evidence so much that I don't even know what evidence is anymore, but that's okay.
That all arguments fail and will fail. That's its own thing. Once again, it's not that these arguments are necessarily, if you can show that they're not completely conclusive, that would still provide evidence, even if it's like, well, there are other things you could conclude from this. It's not about that. It's that if the evidence fails, if there's really no evidence, that means every single argument has to fail so poorly that it doesn't provide any support to the proposition. I think that's the key piece here. And even Alvin Plantinga, he has this paper, just a short.
Okay, I do think I skipped over accidentally without meaning to. But we didn't miss anything. Let's just look at what he has on the screen, because this is the thrust of the not enough quotes in the universe argument, and not enough quotes in the universe after argument or before argument that he's making, right? So he says to the theists, when the atheists or anti-theists, is that still a thing? Are people staying anti-theists still? I mean, come on, whatever. I don't know. Says all arguments for God fail, then push back on the claim. Maybe, but how about you accept that they might indeed think that that's true? Now, all you need to do is say, well, okay, well, have you heard this argument? Yeah, that one sucks. Okay. Have you heard this argument? Yeah, that one sucks. Okay. Well, where does that fail? Okay, that's a fair enough thing. That's a fair enough exchange. Okay. But you got to be careful, because you don't want to shift that burden of proof there. But yeah, I think that if somebody says, all the arguments that I know about suck, that we can take that at face value. And I was like, hey, all arguments for atheism fail. Yeah, okay, cool, sure. And I'd just be like, that's nice. What's your argument? Because it might be true, but you still have your burden of proof to uphold. Okay, so even if your opponent fails their burden of proof, that does not lift your burden of proof. Okay, it's not that incredible of a statement. I mean, it might be to him. But yes, burden of proof is important to uphold. I would agree. Let's see. If there's any way such an argument provides a sliver of evidence for the existence of God, this entire claim goes down the toilet. Well, it can't, because arguments in and of themselves are not evidence. What you probably mean to say that if one of the premises is true, then that might give some credence to God being real beyond just a thought in our heads. But I don't know what you're talking about, really, so I'm guessing here what you mean. So this seems to be a kind of a straw man here. Asking you to provide arguments that don't fail is not your job. Wrong. That is actually your job. How about you give me a valid and sound argument? That is kind of your job, because you're claiming there's a God. That's your claim. So you need to provide me with something that verifies that claim. I would like empirical evidence or repeatable test, which you don't have, apparently. So give me a valid and sound argument then. And if I think they all suck, okay, fine. All right, maybe they all suck. Have you heard this one? Lay it on me. Lay on me my best one. Yes, it is your job. You're weaseling out of it now. This is a burden shifting. So no to this thing. It is actually your job to provide them with an argument that doesn't fail. Then he goes on from there to say the one making the statement is claiming that they are familiar with every argument for God's existence. No, I think that we should steel man them on this and assume that by all, they mean all the arguments that they have heard. I think that it's safe to presume that that's what the person means. They're not omnipotent. They're not or omniscient. They're not claiming to know about every single argument. They could give a reason why every single argument fails miserably. Possibly so, but maybe not off the top of their head. Again, I think you're being a little bit unfair, but okay, ask you give a half dozen examples. Why half dozen? That just seems like an appeal to meaningless examples there. Just give one is enough. One fallacy per argument is more than enough. You don't need a half dozen examples, and nor do you need to explain why each failed, because if it's you say, okay, commits this fallacy, and you go, if you understand the fallacy, then you should be like, oh, okay, I see what you mean by that. If you didn't understand the fallacy, then well, you need to study informal logic, because why at that point there's not much of a debate to be had, right? And then they said, let's see, where's the last one here? Stupid thing. Plantines has over 24. They can pick a quarter of these and explain why they fail. No, I don't need to explain all of them to you. You just give me the one that you think works. But you said, no, that's not my burden, which it is your burden. But you don't want it to be your burden. You want me to be like, here's how the arguments suck, blah, 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 blah. You know what? Tell you what, I'll write a book where I do that, and you can just buy my book then. Will you buy my book if I do that there, Thinking Christian? Will you buy my book? If I write a book explaining how all the arguments suck, will you buy my book? If no, then your whole thing here fails. So yeah, okay.
First seen somebody able to do this, and I mean, I understand, right? Maybe I'm putting them on the spot, right? But Alvin Plantinga, he has this paper, just a short paper. It has over 24 theistic arguments, right? If an atheist came to me and claimed there's no evidence for God's existence, I would be like, all right, here's Plantinga's paper. Pick 6 of these arguments and show why, just a quarter of them. Pick 6 of them and show me why they each fail, and I'll believe you in this.
Why? Why Plantinta? Who's that guy? Why should I care what the hell he has to say? I'm gonna rip your paper up into little shreds and toss it into the garbage. I don't care what this guy said. Where's your argument? You don't have your own? You have to use somebody else's argument? Okay. Why? Can't come up with a new argument? A unique argument? That's you know, do you why are you relying on someone else? I don't know. I'm just asking questions at this point. But yeah, that overreaction to Planty, whoever the belief that guy is. I don't know who the hell Planty is or why I should care. But yeah, no, I don't. It's like, oh, but this guy's got a dozen arguments. Okay, great. Where's your argument? Where's your best argument? Just give me your best argument. I'm not going to spend my time and energy pointing out all these fallacies again. But if you really wanted me to, I'll do an entire book about all of Planty's arguments and all the arguments that I know about, and I'll analyze every single one of them for every single fallacy that they have and all the scientific problems that they have, and I will charge $88 for that book. So I'll call it the Thinking Christian Sucks book. No, I'm not going to call it that. The all the arguments have been eaten book. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. I'll come up with a good name later. But at any rate, the question I would ask Thinking Christians would be like, are you going to buy that book when it comes out? Because if not, then you don't really care what my arguments against your crappy ass arguments are, do you? Anyways, I don't know. I'm just saying. By the way, I shouldn't have said that Thinking Christian sucks. I don't know why I said that. I retract that statement. I don't know if he sucks or not. He might suck, but his arguments may or may not suck. So far, he hasn't made any. I'm waiting for that, but perhaps I'll have the knockdown argument for God in this video.
In this particular way. So they can go off and do it, and maybe I'd be satisfied. But the fact that no one is even, people, in a lot of cases, people maybe aren't even familiar with this, but the fact that people haven't done this, it's just, have you even engaged with the arguments? And are you even justified saying that all arguments fail and will fail? That's its own thing. Once again.
Yeah, well, no, I don't know who that guy is, so I guess I haven't ever dealt with his arguments. But I'd imagine, I'd guess, I'd hazard a bet or two. I'd bet at least $10, maybe more with Yin Yang here, that their arguments are going to be versions of arguments that we've already dealt with before. Because that's it. It's just, we're going to have a cosmological argument. He's going to have, or of some sort, he's going to have some sort of cosmological argument. He's going to have some sort of version of morality argument. And maybe he'll say something about empty tomb or some other stuff like that, right? It's just going to be versions of that stuff. So, same old, just in his own words. That's what it's going to be. So I don't need to knock down his arguments. I can knock down those general arguments. But I could also knock down his arguments. But have you engaged with all the atheist arguments out there? Oh, no, you haven't. Have you shown that none of these arguments have logical fallacies? Where's your homework? Because it's your burden, not mine. I don't need to disprove it. You should be trying to show that you should be giving us the best argument that there is, the most valid and sound argument that you're aware of, whatever that argument is. Stop wasting your time and saying, oh, you need to do this and that. No, we don't. We don't need to do any of that bullshit. Your burden is yours. Give us one valid and sound argument. Whatever that is. I don't care who did it, where it came from, whatever. Show me that. If you think that all of Plantia's arguments are valid and sound, okay, then all I need to do is knock down one of his arguments, and that's all that matters.
Again, it's not that these arguments are necessarily, if you can show that they're not completely conclusive, that would still provide evidence, even if it's like, well, there are other things you could, conclude from this. It's not about that. It's that if the evidence fails, if there's really no evidence, that means every single argument has to fail so poorly that it doesn't provide any support to the proposition. I think that's the key piece here.
Yeah, notice how much he equivocated evidence and arguments there. They were like interchangeable. Isn't that that's interesting to me? Because earlier, like, you know what I'm saying, guys, girls, robots out there. You know what I'm saying. Okay, anyways, but yeah, there's a lot of equivocation for what the bleep evidence means here. What he really means every time he uses the word evidence so far, he means arguments. So the arguments suck. Yeah, they sure do. Well, prove that they suck. Why? Why should I? Well, I'm not going to believe you. I don't care if you believe me or not. The arguments suck. Give me a good one. It's not my job. Okay. The arguments suck then. Bye. Have a nice life. I guess. Whatever. Because that's the end of that conversation. Because you didn't uphold your burden. You said, hey, there's a God. Okay, cool. What's God? Well, he's all loving. All powerful. Okay. And omniscient. Knows everything. Okay, cool. And what proof do you have of that? Well, here's an argument. Okay, great. Does this argument suck? I don't know. Have you heard this one before? I call it the Bohemian Rhapsody argument. No, I've never heard that argument before. Okay, it starts like this. Because is this real life or is this fantasy? See, if it's real, then you need a realtor. But if it's fantasy, then you just need a fanator. Either way, you need a God. And I'll be like, well, that's a weird argument. I think there's a few logical fallacies in there. Let me get a pen and paper out and deduce what those logical fallacies are. No. If you can't come up with them right now, then I'll still believe. Well, that's on you. But I don't take this as evidence, and I need to analyze this for logical fallacies. And if I'm unable or unwilling to do that, I need to get somebody else to do that, you know? And maybe you should have done that before you handed this argument to me, because it wasn't yours. Do you understand informal logic? Because you shouldn't have handed me this argument, because it sucks. You want me to explain why? Yes, I do. Okay, great. Here's why. Then I explain why. And then, well, that doesn't matter anyways, because I just know that there's a God. I'm like, okay, I've got all these other arguments you haven't examined. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and that's where I would just push back on this claim, right? The fact that a lot of these arguments are in serious debate in philosophical journals, and they have been for many years, it's, in my opinion, reasons to at least think that that these arguments fail. If they all failed, then people wouldn't be continually debating them.
Wrong. No, that people debate things that don't work is true all the time. Okay, so as a Christian, you don't believe the Quran is correct. Perhaps in full, I don't know, but at least in part. But you would debate it, right? You would debate the Quran. You would debate against the Quran, right? So to you, you'd be like, this thing fails. It just completely fails. So the fact that you're still debating it, or that humans are still debating it, doesn't mean that it works. It can fail and be obviously fallacious, and humans will still debate it. People are out there debating that there is a flat earth. People are out there debating about vaccines and how they work. This is known stuff. People debate biological evolution, even though that's really a well understood science. It's like, oh no, not evolution, you know. And so for some theists, that's just a dead point to them. And they, no, evolution, and it came from rocks, and they don't, you know, and they don't understand anything about it, and they'll misrepresent it, etc., and they'll make all sorts of bad arguments about it. So yeah, maybe you're not one of those. Hopefully not. Hopefully you're okay with biological evolution and the age of the earth and the age of the universe. But these things shouldn't be contested, but they are, because that's what humans do. We debate stuff. Hell, we debate the merits of Star Trek versus Star Wars, when clearly Star Trek is superior in every single way. Okay, maybe not the films, but hear me out. The films, at least for the next generation, I don't consider those canon. And the reason is, wait, go back to the video. Oh, all right.
And it's not enough to just assert that they fail. You have to actually show why they fail. And I'll say, yeah, like there are definitely arguments that have failed, just in the same way that there are many naturalistic explanations for things that have also failed.
Oh, really? So since you have been complaining this whole time that when you make a statement that you should support it with something, right? You need to support that, right? You said naturalistic explanations of things have failed. Really? Which one? Tell us about it. Tell us about all of them. At least a half dozen, right? Because that's what you're wanting from us. So because you said that there are naturalistic explanation of things that have failed, then I expect you to deliver on at least a half dozen examples of naturalistic explanations that fail. And since we're dealing with nature, that's science. So I'm going to expect you to have some peer-reviewed publications that agree with your side, that you know how to and have access to the full papers, and give that to us so that we can examine and make sure that they do indeed agree with your side, and maybe that you've even helped contributed to these papers. That would be an extra bonus, right? I'm sure you're going to have all of that, right? Right? Hello? You're gonna have that, right? No? That was too much? I asked for too much? Okay. How about an argument? Can you have an argument for, like, any naturalistic explanation that's failed? Like, can you give us an example? Right? Because you'll do that, right? Because you just said the thing. So I'm sure that he's gonna do it in this video, right? He wouldn't just say this and then not give us evidence.
But the claim here is not that some fail, it's that all have failed or all have and will fail. And this, once again, implies a familiarity with all such arguments, not just a
Well, if you're not willing to steel man your opponent, I guess.
few of them, not just the poor ones that people give when they haven't really thought about these things, but every single argument, including the ones argued in these philosophical journals and things.
Yeah, and note that where they are being argued in philosophical journals, right? Philosophers debating other philosophers. Now, unless they are engaged in informal logic, then they are not using any system. If they are engaged in informal logic, then those debates can be analyzed for logical fallacies on both sides, and a conclusion can be drawn by a third, hopefully disinterested party that's just there to analyze the argument. I try to approach all arguments in that way and just analyze them for logical fallacies. I did that with an atheist a while ago who committed several ad hominems, and people did not like that. They didn't like that he committed ad hominems. They didn't like that I was pointing it out. They didn't like that I was technically correct. They just didn't like it. But I'm like, whatever. That's what he did. So I'm staying with it. That's what happened. Sorry, guys. It's just how it is. That's just how it works. And he's like, oh, no, but it's not. No, it is. Yes, this is what it is. The thing that he said wasn't an ad hom is exactly what an ad hom is. And in another video of his, he says, you're using logical fallacies wrong. And then he goes on to misrepresent what an ad hom is in that video, too. So, yeah, atheists can fail on doing logic. Now, he's a smart guy in all other realms, as far as I can tell, or at least the realms that he covers. But when it comes to informal logic, he sucks. He needs a better argument. He needs to understand informal logic. But I think, and I don't want to speculate too much on people's thoughts and feelings, because it's just, it's pure speculation. Who knows? It's like maybe he does that because he has already said so many times in his videos that people are frauds that he feels like he needs to defend that he's able to say fraud. And so in order to do that, he's got to misrepresent what an ad hominem is by saying, no, it's fine to call somebody a fraud if they're a fraud. Well, kind of, but not really, because it's still an ad hominem. So no, don't do that. Just point out the flaws of the argument. Anyways, but you get the point. What was I talking about? All right. No, the fact that they're still being debated doesn't mean that they haven't failed. It just means that people have refused to accept that they have failed. So that's all that means.
So yeah, I'd still say the fact that they're still being debated and argued seems to imply that they have anything but failed. In fact, they're succeeding at continuing to create discussion, which I think is a very good thing. And I would say,
well, that's true of just about anything we humans do. Politics succeeds in creating discussion. Again, Star Wars versus Star Trek, a completely fictional realm, both of them. I mean, a few elements maybe of reality that they got right, here and there or whatever, right? But we can debate these things. The Enterprise versus a Death Star, what would win, and what's their power levels, and and yeah, but it's all bullshit. It doesn't make it true just because we're debating it, and it doesn't make it that it didn't fail just because we're debating it. So your conclusions are just way out there. But yeah, it's your thing. None of this is evidence for God so far. Nor is it you proving your earlier statement, which I'm totally going to harp on for the rest of this video until you produce at least one natural explanation that you think have failed. But you're totally going to give us that, I'm sure, right?
too, yeah, most of the sophisticated atheists that I know who've at least engaged with some of these arguments, they're instead going to say that they're unconvincing, not a failure. They know better than to.
Did you catch it, everybody? Let me rewind it.
And I would say too, yeah, most of the sophisticated atheists that I know who've at least engaged.
All right, did you catch it this time? Just want to make sure you guys, gals, robots, etc., catch it. The sophisticated atheists. Isn't that a beautiful poisoning of the well? The sophisticated atheists have done this. The other ones, they're not sophisticated, right? You can just ignore those nitwits. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They haven't looked into these arguments. It's just there's just a bunch of morons. But the sophisticated ones, the ones on my level that have studied all the arguments, well, let's just do away with the poisoning of the well, shall we? Can we just do that for once? Well, that'd be great. I'd like that. That would be nice to have in a video. Oh, well. Anyways.
Engage with some of these arguments, they're instead going to say that they're unconvincing, not a failure. They know better than to claim that they're a failure because, once again, you have to show why it's a failure, and you also have to continue addressing any points that could claim, well, it could be successful under this circumstance or that circumstance.
That's not how informal logic works there, buddy. No, you analyze the argument and it stands or fails on its own merits. Now, this is something that William Lane Craig should know, but I don't know. I guess he just doesn't care. I don't know. But he has pages dedicated to the Quran. Well, I get it because that was his thesis thing. So I guess he kind of feels like he has to defend it. Otherwise, his PhD is kind of meaningless. His PhD is kind of meaningless, but nonetheless, the Quran does fail. But what he does is he tries to explain the Quran with all these other pages that explain what the premise means. But that means your argument failed. That you have to explain every premise and what it really means that your argument failed. Because the argument should stand on its own. It shouldn't need that sort of thing outside. You should be able to reduce it to if A then B, B then C, A there's C. It should be able to line up like that nicely. But with the Quran, it don't. It breaks for many, many reasons. And Craig does his best to fix the Quran, not by fixing the actual argument, but just saying other things about the argument. Under these conditions, if you squint your eyes and if Einstein is wrong, then this theory of time is correct, and then that means that I can have this thing be right. What? Okay. But no, if the argument didn't work under the condition that it's in right now, then that argument is done. Go fix that argument. Don't be like, oh, but under this condition, the argument could work. Yeah, and if I had wings, I wouldn't bump my ass when I was jumping as a frog. Wait, how does that saying go? You know, yeah. But look, and if my grandmother had wagons, she'd be a wheel. Wait, no, that's not how that saying goes either. You know, whatever. But if pigs could fly, then they would have wings. Yes, that's no wait, that's not how. You know what I'm talking about though. Anyways, whatever. Maybe you don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I blame Thinking Christian. TC, this is your fault, and also Yin Yang Mountain, because I gotta throw them under the bus for no reason.
You would once again have to show that all of those premises fail, everything fails. It's just a really strong claim. So I think a better place, if you're an atheist, is just say, I find all evidence or all arguments that I've seen thus far unconvincing. And then at that point, you can actually have a productive discussion. You can say, okay, well, what do you find unconvincing about?
No, I'm happy with saying that every argument that I've heard or seen or read, or I guess seen equals, I mean, if I've seen it, I've read it. I mean, yeah, all arguments that I know about, they all suck. I'm happy to say that. Yeah, no, I'll stand by that. Yeah, they all suck. But I mean, like, I can do them one at a time, analyze them with a video, like, and do that. But here's the thing: if I point out all the fallacy, actually, again, I'll probably just write this into a book and charge $88 for it because I want his money. If I'm gonna do that, then he better pay me, And maybe I'll figure out how to not self-publish it so I actually get a decent amount, because I don't make that much when my books sell, because they're published on demand. They're like so. But yeah, totally, it's gonna be $88, maybe 88 cents, just because I don't know why. Just because $88, 88 cents. Yeah, and be called all your arguments suck by Deconverted Man, or like all the arguments that I know, and then like in parentheses that I know about for God suck. Prove wrong by Deconverted Man, or by Dan Green, which is my pen name that I use online and on my books. Yeah, that's what it will be called. And then like in the intro, it'll be like, I'd like to thank Yin Yang Mountain and Nerdy Rodent and Kalesa 789, even though I have no idea who that is, and I thank them for things, and I'll put that in the opening. I'll probably forget by the time I write it, but then you have to buy my book, right? And then after you read my book, right, then you have to agree because I've shown you all the fallacies. Then what do? Then you're gonna what? Make a new argument? Move the goalpost again? Or are you going, at what point will you concede that it's, you're done, but you don't have evidence. You have arguments. You keep equating evidence and arguments, but I don't agree with that thing. And it's just, that's where you and I differ there. But, we mean different things by this word. I don't agree with your definition of this word. I understand what you mean by it, but you keep changing what you mean by it throughout this presentation. It seems actually, you are actually somewhat consistent. By evidence, you actually mean arguments, but whatever. Anyways, but yeah, all the arguments suck, and I'm happy to say that, and I'm happy to publish a book by it. Will you buy my book when I do that? If I did do that, if you say yes, I don't know. Can you make a contract with somebody that they have to buy your book if you make it? I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, I do that. I'll make a contract with this guy. And there'll be a whole YouTube thing, and they'll just wait for me to write this book, however long that takes, and then I'll write it, and then I'll have to buy it, even if my book sucks. Yeah, that'll show them. Wait a minute, I could just price the book at any amount that I wanted. Loopholes. Okay, anyway, back to the video. All right.
About this, would there be something that would change your mind? Blah, blah, blah. But to claim that there is no evidence, or that all the arguments fail, I think it's just way too strong of a claim.
Hey, there's no argument, there's no evidence, and all the arguments fail. Actually, Yeah, there's no evidence. All you have is bad arguments. That's my claim. I'm happy to do that. I am happy with that claim. I am completely and utterly glad to sit upon my throne of claim of where I say, yeah, there's no evidence for Yahweh, and all the arguments for Yahweh suck. All of them. Period. And they have to suck. Why? Because Yahweh is logically incoherent, and I have an argument for that. All I need to do is have a valid and sound argument for why Yahweh is incoherent on a logical level, and then by default, all arguments for Yahweh would then have to fail because I've proven the being to be an illogical entity. And an illogical entity could never be argued for in any coherent manner. So there you go. That dismisses your whole idea that I'd have to show that all the arguments suck. No. I just need to give one positive argument that Yahweh is the incoherent idea, and then I can make the claim as I just did. There's no evidence for Yahweh, and all the arguments for Yahweh have one or more logical fallacies. And all I have to do is give one argument for Yahweh. And unlike you, who will never give us the thing for the nature, the nature failing thing that I said I was going to harp on for the rest of this video, and I've already forgotten it by now, but you know what I'm saying. I'll give you that. It's very simple, okay? If Yahweh is portrayed or stated to be a logical being, right? Because you couldn't trust an illogical being, right? You couldn't. You should, person. We can't really trust people. I mean, you could trust people to some extent, but ultimately, people can lie. God supposedly cannot lie. Now, a logical fallacy, we could understand that a human would engage in logical fallacies because they're flawed beings. But a perfect being could never commit a logical fallacy. All right. So if Yahweh is perfect, it cannot commit a logical fallacy. And if it does, it doesn't exist. Yahweh has committed several logical fallacies. I only need one example. He has committed an ad valorem. And he's also committed an appeal to bribery. In that he said, if you believe this, then you get the reward. If you don't believe it, you get the punishment. Those are logical fallacies that he's committed. Therefore, Yahweh is not a logical being. Therefore, Yahweh does not exist. Therefore, all the arguments that you could have for Yahweh all suck. Now, I didn't put that in premise format because I'm doing it off the cuff. If you want it in premise format, I'll draft up a version with Yin Yang and we'll do it. Why Yin Yang? Because he likes to do that for me. He'll give me a hard time about it. Sure, we'll probably wind up talking for a few hours. What? Focus on the video? No, I want to talk about other things. Okay, back to the video.
And why I think many theists are going to assume that this just means somebody's being ignorant or somebody's just lying. The next thing I want to do is look at this claim a little bit more closely. I want to continue specifically look at number 2, what counts as evidence, because I think this happens in many cases too. When somebody claims that there's no evidence for God's existence, in many cases, I think what they're implicitly saying is there's no scientific evidence or natural evidence that convinces me of God's existence. And as a result, when people say, prove to me that God exists, they don't really want a logical proof based on, contingency or causality or anything like that. Maybe they won't accept those things. They're really saying, well, design a scientific experiment that will demonstrate God exists, similar to how we demonstrate the existence of natural things. But this is kind of a category error because this is basically God doesn't exist in the natural orders.
Okay. So some props where props is due. You're right in the assessment that by evidence, it is fair to assume to some degree that people are talking about empirical evidence or scientific evidence, however you want to categorize that. The same sort of evidence that I have for everything, I would expect to have that sort of evidence for God. Now, you say It's a category error. Category error. Problem is, you have to establish that there is, in fact, a category in the first place. You said God doesn't exist within the natural order. Okay, then God doesn't exist, because the natural order is what is there. That's what there is. There is the natural order. There is a reality. So either God exists in reality or it doesn't. And I call reality the natural order. Now, maybe you mean natural as in a physical or something like that. Okay, God is energy. Fine, whatever. Prove that. But you simply are asserting that God is in a different category, which means now you have the burden to prove that that category exists. If you can't do that, then you don't have any scientific evidence for it, and saying that, well, it just falls outside of that, well, so does magic. Category error. Magic doesn't exist within the natural order. Category error. Laud does not exist within the natural order. Category error. Flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist within the natural order. That's why we don't have category error. That you owe me $1,000 doesn't exist within the natural order. And you might say, wait, but that is a natural claim. No, it's not. It's a supernatural claim. Oh, now you can't examine it. Ha 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 ha. How about this? Admit that you don't have evidence in the scientific sense for God, and stop saying this category error unless you're able or willing to prove it. But how could you prove it if you don't have evidence for it? The category is a non-category. Whee!
So why would there be some sort of natural experiment that could be made to test God exists? So
why wouldn't there be? How do you know that God doesn't have this? How are you able to know all of the things about the entire universe? Remember earlier when you said you want us to give you all the proofs and stuff? Well, I'm still waiting for you to produce the natural things that you thought failed, at least one of those. And now I want you to produce, the fact that nowhere in the natural order does God exist. So show me that God doesn't exist in the natural order somehow. I don't know how you're going to do that, but that's now what you have to show me because you made that claim. Oops.
So category error, if you're not familiar with it, is basically trying to ask a question where the answer to the question doesn't belong to the same category as the thing in question. So when I ask, what color is 2 + 2?
A person with synesthesia could actually answer that question, because like their senses are like their eyes and nose and stuff. They're all like switch around, and their hearing, and it can be so like they can see numbers and colors, so they could actually answer that question. So it wouldn't be a category error to them. I know I'm just being pedantic, but I'm just saying, like, yeah.
It's like 2 + 2 gives me a number. It doesn't give me a color. So the question is invalid. And in a similar way, the idea that you could do some sort of...
Or is it? Maybe by color, I'm actually saying C times O times L times O times R. And what numbers times each other would equal what 2 + 2 equals? So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 numbers multiplied together would have to equal 4. So what is that? And since you're a math guy, I'm sure you can figure that out. I don't know what the answer would be, but you can figure it out. Maybe that's what I meant by what color is 2 + 2. Nah, I'm just screwing around to screw around. All right.
Sort of scientific experiment to demonstrate that God does or does not exist is assuming that God exists in the natural order of things, which by definition he does not.
By definition of who? Your definition? Because let's go way back. Okay, you said all-knowing, all-loving, all powerful. Okay, well, all knowing suggests that you know about things, and the only way that I know that people can know about anything is if they have a brain. All loving means, again, you have a brain, you have emotions, and all powerful, not really. I mean, that's kind of vague in a way. Like, what does that mean? But I'm guessing it means the ability to do whatever the bleep you want, or at least whatever is logically possible to be done. Um, yeah, so all of that would be within nature. Like, it's conceivable that you could program a computer to know everything that humans know. Now, maybe you wouldn't say that's all knowing, but it's good enough. As far as being loving, you could make the computer seem like it loved us, by the language it produced. And then it would be pretty darn powerful as such things go, because you could like search for anything and be like, oh yeah, that's what this thing says here, and you know. So that's all within the natural realm of things. Why would I think that those are not within the natural realm? So you didn't define God to be something that is not in the natural realm. So your own definition doesn't agree with this. Whoops.
Expect to find. And I think many people are and say, what would I expect to find? God didn't want this thing to see, even if it were true. It exists in the natural order of things, which by definition, he does not. He created the natural order and he's in many cases outside of it. Right?
How do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Can you prove that? I would like 12 dozen and a half 0.7 arguments that prove that. Actually, I want just evidence, which you don't have because you can't have it because that's a category error, which you then have to prove, but you can't prove because there's no way to prove. You can't have evidence of something that isn't evidential, so you just pretend that it is. I guess it's magic. Got it. All right. Deliberate or ignorant, I love that poisoning of Welder, attempt to narrowly restrict allowed evidence to be what we would not expect to see if such a thing were true. Yeah. So if such a thing were true, let's see. So if magic is really real, but only a handful of people can do real magic, then it's not testable by science. And see, if you go to try to test it, well, the magic turns off. The moment that you go to try to do any sort of test, the magic just turns off. That's just sad to say. I can move a paper with just my mind, I can make it move a little bit on a smooth surface table. Now, you might want to say, maybe I'm blowing on it. And you want to sprinkle some stuff to see if I'm blowing. But that's a test. Now the magic's gone. Because it's not testable. You see, the moment you try to test it, the magic vanishes. It's only there when you don't test it. See, you're just doing a category error. That's all. You just have to believe it. That's all.
Right? And in many cases, I think, too, this is just in a deliberate or maybe an ignorant attempt to narrowly restrict the allowed types of evidence to what we wouldn't even expect to see, even if it were true.
All right. And I did a video long back about miracles, even if they were, what the bleep did I call it? Like, even if miracles existed, we could never prove them. Going over the problems of miracle. Let's see, what the hell did I say? Come on. Even if there we go. Found it. It's called miracles. Even if they exist, they cannot be identified as such. So yeah, I'll just stand by that argument that I made there. So the problem with to kind of try to summarize that video in brief here is you have something that you want to classify as miracle, okay? But the identification method is to say, well, I don't have any naturalistic explanation for what happened. Now, The problem there is maybe there's a naturalistic explanation that you didn't think of, so that you're wrong in categorizing it because you've done the logical fallacy of an appeal to ignorance. Or maybe you say, well, I've seen this amazing thing. There's no way that could be natural, which is an appeal to personal incredulity, right? So in either case, you've committed a logical fallacy, which means you can't identify that thing as a miracle, even if it actually is a miracle, because the only way to say it's a miracle is to actually eliminate all the naturalistic possibilities that there are. But even then, you could never do that because there always might be something that you didn't take into consideration. And the goalpost could always just be moved a little bit back to say, well, maybe it's a miracle under these conditions, right? So if there's no way to identify miracle, just like there's no way to identify magic, then that's a problem, not a feature. God being something that you can't verify via science would seem to be a true statement. And you don't need to go the whole, well, it's the wrong category, because you need to prove that, and just say, yeah, there's no empirical evidence for God. Just admit it, there isn't any. Okay, great. Moving on.
Because you could just as easily say, okay, if you claim God doesn't exist, design a scientific experiment that proves God doesn't exist.
Sure, no problem. For Yahweh, easy. You said it's all powerful and all loving and knows everything. Well, then it already knows what I'm about to do, right? So it already knows the demand that I'm going to make on it, which is, and if two or more are gathered in his name, then whatever is asked will be given unto them. Okay, right? So I've got Yin Yang Mountain, and we can both go, hey, God. And I'm sure Yin Yang is doing it on his side. I don't need to see him type it in chat. I just know that Yin Yang's a cool guy like that. He would do it for me. He would, because it's to do the experiment. So you're just gonna have to trust me that he's doing. But anyways, if you don't trust me, we'll get him on there and we'll do it that way. We'll both pray at the same time, and we'll just pray a very simple prayer. Yahweh, make this blue stuffed sheep that Deacon Vertiman has, make that levitate off of his desk. And that will show us that you love us. And then when God fails to do this, we must then conclude that God is not all powerful and or doesn't love us. So there you go. There's a scientific test. We just did it and it failed. Of course, we know it's going to fail because God's untestable, which you haven't gotten to yet, but I'm interested in how you're going to excuse God from testability, right?
And you can't do it because there's all these other reasons. Somebody could say, okay, well, I'm going to prove that God doesn't exist because I'm going to pray for this thing and it's not going to happen.
Oh my God, he said the thing.
The theist gets to say, well, maybe God didn't want this thing to happen. So, this is something that cuts both ways here.
I didn't know he was going to say the thing that I just said. Wait a minute. But see, the theist has a way out, right? Well, God didn't want to do that. Well, then God doesn't love me. You said God loves everyone, right? So if he loved me, he would do this thing. Well, no, because God doesn't want to do that. Okay, then there's no way to falsify it. And that's a bug, not a feature. It's not a good thing when you can't falsify a thing. You should be able to falsify it.
And I think the question that you need to ask here is not, what scientific evidence would convince me that God exists, but what evidence would I expect to find if a God did exist, and how would I come to know one way or another?
Why can't I ask for scientific evidence? That's narrowing the allowed evidence to be what you expect me to see, right? I mean, why shouldn't I expect it? Everything else I know about can be messed with in some way, shape, or form by empirical methodology or repeatable testing. There's only a few things that you can't do that with, and the things that you tend to not be able to do that with are abstract objects of the mind. They are things that exist in our brain. They are ideas that you can't hold in your hand. So then if that's what God is, then I would expect there to be no way to test it in a scientific manner other than to show that it's an idea in the head, which could be done via reading, mind the lines that are drawn, EKG, whatever the bleep it is. I can't think of the thing that not doesn't read your brain, but it prints out the lines that your brain makes when it does things. You know what I'm talking. Yeah. God answers prayers in the form of yes, no, and wait. It's one of the oldest scams. Right? It's an 8-ball. So if I can't distinguish an 8-ball's answer from God's answers, then God doesn't really care about me at all. And so why don't you just say that God can't be tested? And then why can't God be tested? Now you're going to come up with some reasons for that excuse away why God can't be tested. But that's a bug in the system. I would expect that if you made claims about a God, that would be something that I could empirically verify. Why wouldn't I be able to? It's just beyond. I don't know. It's just beyond. Apparently, supposedly, God was willing and able to send an avatar of itself, Jesus, to Earth. So, tell you what, God, you really care about us in this modern day and age. Send down Jesus. Let him be experimented by a few labs. In fact, there could be multiple Jesuses all around the world simultaneously. That would be amazing. We could prove genetically that he's the same person, same DNA, same fingerprints, that he's saying the same thing simultaneously in all time zones in different languages. That would be amazing. That would be something, wouldn't it? Why not do that? Because God could do that, right? So why wouldn't it? Well, because you could come up with all sorts of ad hoc explanations to why God wouldn't do that. But my reason is it's very simple. God doesn't love us, or it's not all powerful, or both. Or maybe, here's an idea, your God, Yahweh, doesn't exist at all, except for as an idea in your head.
Now I think you're getting somewhere, and I think these are the right questions to ask rather than claiming, being too positivist about it. Instead, just being a little bit more open-minded and say, what would I expect to find? What evidence would I not expect to find? I think atheists who argue, okay, I don't think God exists because there's so much evil in the world. I think that's a fair point to say, like, I don't think that this exists because it seems to me this, and this. That's a different type of argument. But that's different than saying, okay, prove to me scientifically with some, which once again, scientific experiments don't even provide proof per se, but they provide evidence. So that's kind of its own thing. But
what? Now he's equivocating what proof means. I mean, the scientific experiment would be proof to me of something. Whatever. I don't know. I don't know what he means by words anymore.
Even then, I hope you see that this is not the kind of evidence we're going to expect to find. And I think,
why not? I mean, you just asserted that we're not going to find it, but how could you possibly know that? How could you possibly demonstrate that to be true? Now, I also did a video. Oh man, did I post my other video when I talked about it? I don't remember if I did. Video that's related to this in some way, shape, or form.
Prove to me scientifically with some, which once again, scientific experiments don't even provide proof per se, but they provide evidence. So that's kind of its own thing. But even then, I hope you see that this is not the kind of evidence we're going to expect to find. And I think many people are familiar with this.
But okay. I mean, this assumes, I don't know. I was going to mention some video I made that was on topic. I have no idea what the hell that video was. Darn it. But, you're assuming that, oh, no, now I know what it was. Smart kid, dumb arguments. made a video called that. All right. Yes, smart kid, dumb arguments. And in that video, this kid was like, I'm going to prove God using science. And he's a Catholic, right? And I said, well, if you succeeded, then you would disprove Yahweh. At least the version of Yahweh that many theists think that is Yahweh. Because Yahweh is said to be not a thing that you can prove using science. But if we did prove God using science, then we would disprove your version of God, right? So what if you're just wrong about there not being scientific evidence for it, because the actual real God does have scientific evidence for it? It wouldn't be your God, but it'd be a different God. I don't know. Maybe you hadn't thought about that possibility. I don't know.
Right? The person who asks a question like that, demonstrate to me, scientifically. I really see this as a result of a flawed epistemology rather than it being anything insightful.
Well, that's nice, but you're the one with the flawed epistemology, because you said it's a category error without demonstrating it's a category error. Also, remember that thing that you said about there being a natural flaw that you haven't done any demonstration of? Yeah, still need that too. You've made a lot of claims so far, but you haven't supported them at all. So still waiting for you to do that. You haven't done it so far, but yeah. Prove to me that human rights exist and I'll start believing in them. That's actually easy to do. I mean, here's a document that says these human rights exist. There you go. It's like a legal thing, right? It's not like it's an abstract idea, but you can prove that it's a thing that we do. So that's easily done. So, okay.
In the same way, these are the people, presumably, maybe they do or don't believe in human rights, but this is pretty much like asking the question, right? Demonstrate to me human rights exist and I'll start believing in them. Or demonstrate to me that I live in the real world and not the Matrix or some computer simulation, and I'll believe it,
That's not how the burden of proof works at all. But yeah, I mean, again, there's no reason to believe no, it's just not how the burden of proof works. I was going to try to go down the rabbit hole where I reversed this on him, but no, it just broke everything. That's not how the burden of proof works. So no, it's not a flawed epistemology to expect there to be scientific evidence or empirical evidence for something when we have that for everything else. In fact, again, the only thing that we don't have that for are abstract ideas that exist in our brains and nowhere else. So if God's an abstract idea, then fine. It doesn't need any empirical evidence because it's just an idea. But then you'd have to admit that God's an idea and not an actual thing that exists in the actual universe or world or reality somewhere. Which, oddly enough, theists sometimes will say that God doesn't exist in reality by placing God outside of space-time. Because space-time is reality as far as we know it. So, yeah. Anyways.
Show me some evidence of this stuff. And if these things did exist, would they be the kinds of things that we would expect to be able to be tested and found out in this particular way? And if somebody does believe they live in the real world, or they do believe in human rights, but not God, to the theist, it looks like special pleading. It looks like they're raising their evidential standard for God for some reason that's difficult to understand.
Okay, I see. Okay, so you don't understand the demand for empirical evidence for this thing called God when maybe I or somebody else hypothetical accepts ideas that are not evidential in the same way, right? So you're like, oh, you're requiring this thing. That's not fair. You don't require, you know what that's called? You know what that's called? Because there's a name for that fallacy. It's a so whataboutism. It's a whataboutism, right? So what about this? What about that, right? I was going to say QQ Quay, but it's kind of that, but it's not exactly. Um, no, it kind of fits. Yeah, you as well. It's like, well, you also use you believe in X, Y, and Z without any empirical evidence, but you're asking for that for this, but so it's like, even if it's true, it doesn't negate that you should be able to ask for that evidence. Okay, even if it's true that the person believes everything that comes their way without any evidence, but you say, oh, well, God exists, and like, I need evidence of that. You cannot quay your way out of that by saying, oh, well, you don't need that for anything else. It doesn't matter. I'm asking it for this thing. It doesn't matter that I don't need it for everything else. I want it for this thing. That's it. That's so give them that. And if you cannot do that, and that's what they require, then say, well, look, I don't have that. Just be honest with them. Just say, I have no empirical evidence. I have no repeatable test to offer you. That's the way it is. But I do have really bad arguments, and then you can trot out the really bad arguments.
For whatever reason. That's why it looks like special pleading. And I hope that the atheist or agnostic who is watching this video, and if so, thank you, because I'm probably being pretty harsh. I hope you understand why it would look like special pleading to those of us who are theists.
To you, it might. I mean, I guess, but God is not a mundane thing. Okay. I'm going to want. Now, I'm not going to say I want more evidence for God. Some might do that. I want the amount of evidence that I have for everything else for God as well. I think that that's a fair standard to set. I don't think it's unreasonable to set the standard, because everything that I'm aware of is empirically verifiable and or repeatably testable in some way, shape, or form. And the only things, like I've said, the only things that I know about that are not empirically investigatable or testable are abstract objects of the mind, things that are just ideas. So if you're saying that it doesn't have empirical evidence or repeatable test, then it must be an abstract object of the mind. And if you say, well, no, it's not, it's more than that, okay, you can't offer me the proofs that I would expect to see. I'm not sure how you're possibly going to offer a valid and sound argument when the only way that you could ever hope to do that is to actually appeal to the real world, which you need to be able to demonstrably demonstrate. So if you can't demonstrably demonstrate God, then you could never have a valid and sound argument for God. But that's your problem, not mine. I require my belief to believe in God. I require it to demonstrate in the same way that everything else has demonstrated itself to me. And if it is unwilling and or unable to do that, then it might as well not exist.
To say, okay, well, you accept these things based on evidence that presumably isn't scientifically demonstrative, but yet you deny or you aren't convinced by the existence of God. It's just interesting, right? This is once again, this is epistemology. This is a little bit different. Now I want to go through maybe one or two different rebuttals to this. One rebuttal I sometimes hear is, well, everything else has a natural explanation. Why assume we need to invoke God or propose God as a theory? And I would, at that point, I would just say, I don't agree with that. I think that's false. Natural explanations, when people claim this, just because we can come up with a possible explanation given the constraints of naturalism, doesn't necessarily mean these explanations are plausible, likely, or even good explanations necessarily. So the fact that it's like, I can give an explanation or offer such an explanation under these conditions, that doesn't necessarily mean that such an explanation is good. It just means that you can offer one.
Wow, he's in the weeds now, my friends. I mean, there's really nothing more I can add to this to explain how wrong it is on every single level that I can think of. Um, but yeah, a naturalistic explanation is always going to win out over magic.
And I mean this to say, that doesn't mean we should discount natural explanations. I think in many cases, natural explanations are some of the best ones we have for a lot of different things. But that doesn't.
It's the only ones that we have for anything that, as far as that we can actually demonstrate. And until you demonstrate that something other than the natural is even a thing, we cannot consider it to be a thing at all. My door opens on its own, apparently. I go to investigate. At what point would I be able to claim that it was a supernatural event? It was a ghost. A ghost did it. A ghost opened my door. What would I have to negate? I'd have to negate what? The hinges being off center, the locking mechanism, a person or an animal messed with it. How many naturalistic things would I have to negate? Because they're all plausible, they're all possible. But if I found no evidence, nothing that hinted at a naturalistic explanation, at what point would I be justified, logically speaking, to invoke the supernatural to explain something that could be explained with something that I know is a thing, that is the natural world order? I know that that's a thing for sure because we can demonstrate it, unlike your magical idea that we have no demonstration of whatsoever.
Doesn't mean that they're the only types of explanations that are good.
Yeah, magic.
And then other things that are just difficult to find a natural explanation for, things like the existence of reason.
That's easy to have an explanation of. You're just appealing to personal incredulity here. Yeah, the existence of reason. Humans exist, and we came up with reason. There you go. There's the explanation for it.
Itself. The usefulness or the existence of mathematics.
We came up with that, and so there you go. That's it. We came up with that stuff. So yeah, I mean, are you like suggesting that numbers exist like the number one exists in some sort of Platonic form or some bullshit like that? Because I mean, I don't know if you're a dualist like that, but nah, just numbers are arbitrary things that we've assigned, and I mean, those are abstract objects that exist in our brains and nowhere else. And math would still function the way that it does if there was no minds to have it, but then there'd be nobody to know what math was, so then math wouldn't be done. It would still work, but nobody would be there to make it work. Yeah, no, it's one of those things,
The existence or epistemology of objective morality.
What objective morality? What are you talking about? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, objective morality would always be subjective at some level because you're going to have to tie it to some ethical system, and that your selection of what ethical system is always going to be subjective to some extent. And of course, I've done a video on DCT called DCT, Divine Command Theory, where you can see how wrong DCT is as an ethical system. Because under DCT, there are no objective morals. There's just what God tells you to do.
If you believe in objective morality, whether or not this has a natural basis or natural explanation is very controversial. And I would obviously argue no, I don't think it has a natural explanation. So
then it would have no explanation at all. How would you ever demonstrate that it has no naturalistic explanation? You'd have to eliminate all the natural explanations. So here's a list of 12 dozen naturalistic explanations. You can pick 6 and show me.
That's kind of its own thing too. The other thing too is an explanation for the existence of the natural order itself.
Reality is real. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. Things are the way that they are because they are. There's no deeper why to it. It just is. It's a brute fact of reality. Maybe things couldn't be any other way but this way. I don't know. But just because you can't think of an explanation doesn't mean that the answer is God. No, this is an appeal to personal ignorance. This is an appeal to personal incredulity, an appeal to ignorance, and a God of the gaps. All of these things are just your own. I don't understand it. I don't like the explanations. I'm fine with all the natural explanations that are plausible and possible for any of these. And I don't know which one's right per se, but I do know what the answer isn't. And the answer isn't something that you haven't demonstrated, which you still haven't done in this entire video. Oh, I guess this is him trying to show us the things that he thought that nature couldn't account for, but nature accounts for all of these things, so he was wrong earlier. But at least he got around to showing us what he thinks that nature can't account for. Yay! Now he'll totally show us the category of the supernatural is a thing, right?
An explanation would have to be outside of nature for why the natural order exists. You could argue this has to be supernatural, or maybe what I would like to say is metanatural, something that's outside of the natural order that would eventually cause the natural world or account for the natural world's existence.
And what would account for the supernatural or metanatural? Well, meta, obviously, that's Zuckerberg. I mean, he made the metaverse, right? But seriously, what would account for that? Well, if there's no account for that, it just is a brute fact, then you're allowing for a brute fact to exist. If there is no ultimate reason that the thing is, why is there a God rather than not a God? Well, because God must exist. Okay, save a step. The universe must exist, or reality must exist. It's just a brute fact. If God is a brute fact, then the universe can be a brute fact as well. And you don't need an extra explanation beyond that. Unless, of course, you want magic to be real. I don't, or need it to be real, or feel like it's real, or believe that it's real. I don't care one way or the other. I just want actual ways to show that it's real, but you don't have those. You just have really bad arguments. So I'm not convinced by anything you've said so far. None of this is evidence.
And this is why the naturalist is constrained to claiming that some things can happen uncaused from nothing. Because if causality is something that is metanatural, then that would mean naturalism is false. Because, you would argue causality or any of these other logical principles would have to exist before nature. So that
the hell does that even mean? I'm serious. What do you mean by any of that you just said? I'm gonna go back because I really want to hear it. Wait, what?
That some things can happen uncaused from nothing.
Well, I don't know that there was ever a nothing, because you'd have to have at least one rule or law, and that law would have to be no paradoxes allowed. And there's a very technical reason you would need that law to exist. So that's not nothing already, because you have a law of logic that paradoxes are impossible. Now, that law exists quite nicely on its own without any God required to make it a law, because God also would have to be subject to the laws of logic, like the law of identity and non-contradiction. So God can't make the laws of logic, nor can it be the source of logic, because logic has to be a thing that is not bound to God. So logic then becomes God. Interesting. But logic only exists in our minds as a concept. It's not a thing that exists in any other way. So in the end, the God that you create to explain God, that you're calling logic, is still just a God that exists in the mind. Weird. It's like every God that you could come up with just winds up existing in the brain rather than in reality. but you've placed God outside of reality, I guess, because you're saying things like supernatural or meta, whatever the bleep, and you haven't demonstrated that those are even things that are a thing in the first place. Demonstrate that those things are things. Show me the supernatural or metanatural. Demonstrate that. Oh, you can't. Well, then you can't invoke it as anything. Oops. And also, you couldn't have an argument of it because, you wouldn't be able to have a logically valid argument for something that isn't. You could try, though. I'd love to see you try.
Because if causality is something that is metanatural, then that would mean naturalism is false, because, you would argue causality or any of these other logical principles would have to exist before nature. So that's why the naturalist is basically stuck having to assume that things can just happen uncaused from nothing, and that's why the natural world exists. Their claim is actually a pretty strong claim that the natural world popped into existence from nothing and it exists for no purpose or anything like that. So
lovely little straw man that you've invoked there. I don't know of any naturalist, whatever that means, or materialist, whatever that means. I don't know of any scientist that, or, I guess there might be philosophers who I don't care about that have said something like that. But I certainly don't know any atheists or agnostics or skeptics that have said that things come from nothing. I don't know that nothing is a thing. And like I said, it's impossible as far as I can tell. You would have to have at least one law or rule, and there would be no paradox. So that's already not nothing, because you have something, you have a rule. So that's not nothing. And if you literally had nothing, then there would be nothing to prevent anything from occurring, including paradox, and then everything is possible. But then maybe the moment that you have something, then that something has a law and property to it that then negates the fact that there was no laws before that moment. And maybe that's the start. Who knows? I don't know. But I don't know that there's a nothing, and nor do I claim that there's a nothing. I don't even know that there's a cause to the universe per se. I know that there are plenty of things that we observe that are caused, but I also know that there's things that we're not sure about if they have a cause. Like with quantum physics, you have the two metal plates. When you put them close together, there's the particles and they do stuff. And I don't understand enough about anything to know what the bleep that's about. It doesn't seem like they're caused. Maybe the cause is the metal plates being near each other. I don't know. But they're coming into existence. Why? I don't know. That's just what they do. What's the cause? Maybe there isn't a cause. I don't know. I have no idea how any of that works, and I don't make a claim to know. But maybe one day humans will have the answer to all the things. And maybe it's 42 or something silly, because probably it is. Or some equation, right? And you go, okay, the equation is blah, Zuma Zuma. That's it. That's the equation. And you know what the theist is going to do when we get to that time? They're going to be like, yeah, but you know who made Zuma Zuma? God. Because it's never going to, you're always going to be able to move the goalposts of what God is or how God is or whatever back, because it's non-proven, non-provable, it's untestable, it's unfalsifiable. That sounds more like a thing that you've made up and not something that's actually real, let alone something that cares for us, that can do anything, that is everywhere. And if it was everywhere, then it's also in the natural realm, which then means it should be observable by the natural order. But apparently, somehow you just know that it's not. Okay. Anyways,
So, the extent to which that's a good explanation is up for debate, I would say. The other rebuttal I sometimes hear is Russell's teapot, and I don't think that this has much cognitive meaning as much as trying to be an emotional appeal, but we'll still address it, right? So people will say, well,
you suck so badly at I mean, just come on, man. enough with the poisoning of the well. Really? Okay, you don't like it. Oh, whatever. Just go on. Go ahead. Whatever. You're not going to get what it means either. I'm guessing. I'm going to guess that he has no idea what this is supposed to be about. But let's hear what it.
You know, why should I believe in God? I don't believe in invisible leprechauns or magic teapots or these other sorts of things. The example of Russell's teapot is this invisible teapot revolving around Mars. It's like, well, like
wrong. Or wrong. Just wrong. Just, I mean, you could just do a Google search. Okay. Russell's teapot's an analogy. And let's see if I can get the exact analogy itself. But basically, it's saying that the philosophical burden of proof lies upon a person making the empirically unfalsifiable claims rather than shifting the burden to disprove to others. Okay. So he said, now I don't have the exact phrase here. I'm wondering if I can find that somewhere. So Wiki doesn't have it. But okay, this is good enough. Without offering proof that a teapot too small to be seen by telescopes, not invisible, orbits the sun somewhere in space between the Earth and Mars. Okay, so you got it a little bit wrong. I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna quote the damn thing, at least quote it correctly. Okay, it's not invisible. It's just too small to be seen. Okay, and prove it's not there, right? There you go. Prove that it's not there. Well, you can't see it. It's too small to be seen. So you can't ask for proof of it. You just have to believe it. What does that sound like? Oh, yeah, faith.
Can't say that I can't prove it doesn't exist, but why would I assume that it did exist? The first thing to note is it's just a false equivalence or false comparison.
Well, that's because you don't understand the analogy, I guess. I mean, it's an analogy. Of course, it's gonna not align perfectly because that's not what analogies do. Do you know what an analogy is? I mean, I thought you were a Christian. Didn't Jesus like use analogies all the time? Yeah, I don't know. I would think you would know what an analogy is. It's an analogy is kind of like if you have a Coca-Cola, and you're drinking it, right? And you're trying to do a video explaining how wrong somebody is, and you notice that you've been going for just about 2 hours, and you look and you go, man, his video is 18 minutes and 59 seconds. What the hell is wrong with me? And you wonder in that moment, what is the meaning of any of this? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why is anything here? And then you go, well, maybe it just is. Maybe I just am. Maybe I have no choice but to say all the things that I'm saying right now. What if that's a thing? Or could it be like maybe I'm actually a lobster that thinks it's a human? Could that be? And then you drink the soda and you go, nah, screw all that. And then in the analogy, see, you realize that the analogy is so disconnected from the thing that you were trying to be analogy about that you failed to explain the analogy with an analogy. That's kind of what an analogy is. Thanks for listening.
Obviously, if these things existed, they would exist within the natural order. They're not created from something outside of the natural order. So
sure they are. The an invisible teapot certainly would be supernatural. I mean, we don't know if that I know of any natural way to make it a teapot being invisible, actually invisible, and certainly an invisible leprechaun would also be magical, and that's beyond normal nature. So yeah, goodness gracious, magic. It's magic. Okay, it's just whatever.
So they're kind of, it's a different thing, right? If leprechauns existed, then under the traditional,
we get it. You don't understand Russell's teapot. Got it.
Idea of God, they would have been things that God created themselves. So just from contingency itself, they would be different than God.
Yeah.
Okay. But you could also just say, yeah, well, I believe in this invisible thing called logic that can come and, help our minds create reality. Is this like leprechauns or
Logic doesn't help create reality. What the fuck are you talking about? Did he just what the fuck? What? Uh, th- th- that's not, and it's not an invisible thing. Logic is an abstract object of the mind. No, it's not. Well, I mean, yeah, we invented it to some degree, but no, it's not like leprechauns because leprechauns are magical and not logical. So that is actually a false equivalence. So hey, you got one thing right. Yeah.
magic teapots or these sorts of things? Just because we can't visually see something, does that mean it's like false? I think such logic of trying to imply this is just it's just childish, honestly. I think that's what it comes down to.
It's just childish. It's just childish. You unsophisticated atheist. You're just childish. Yes, yes, yes. Throw out those insults because you have no argument. Keep it coming. I'll take it all. Bring it on. I love the insults. Yes, yes. Make fun of my name or something. Come on. You can do it.
Yeah, and if these arguments are going to succeed, right, you actually need to show that if you're going to say, well, you don't believe in leprechauns, right? Well, is there leprechaunology? Is this a huge field of study that has a lot of published work and people who dedicate their life to studying and arguing for the existence of these things?
Wow, an appeal to scholarship? Really? I mean, this is a form of an appeal to authority. But in this case, we'd have to label it as an appeal to scholarship. Wow. Um, Clearly you don't like Russell's Teapot, and it's also clear that you don't get it or understand it. And either you're being deliberately obtuse or you're just ignorant and stupid. Oh, wait, that's a false trichotomy because you could actually understand it, but for sake of your video, you're deliberately misrepresenting it so that nobody could possibly understand it in hopes that maybe nobody Googles it or whatever, like I did. But yeah, look, the point is that when you make an unfalsifiable claim, the burden is upon you to demonstrate that that thing is a thing. There is a teapot that you cannot observe orbiting the sun. Okay, I would need to prove that that's true. Not say, well, you have to show me that it isn't there. Because how could you do that? Well, you can't use telescopes. Because telescopes can't see the thing. It's too small. It's a tiny teapot. I swear somebody's got to throw a teapot into outer space by now. We've been up to outer space. I'm sure by now there's a teapot orbiting the sun. There's got to be at least one by now, right? And it would be pretty small. We wouldn't see the thing. So there might be several for all we know, right? But nonetheless, it is your burden to prove the claim. That's what the damn thing is supposed to say. That's it. I know you don't like it because you don't like the burden of proof. Well, okay, I'm asserting things about you that I couldn't possibly know, which is a fallacy that I think should be a fallacy, but it's not yet a fallacy. But I'm going to say it's a fallacy anyways. Maybe it will become one day. How do you make things into a fallacy anyways? But anyways, this would be the fallacy of special knowledge or mind reading, where I claim to know something about what you're thinking, but I can't possibly hope to know that. So don't do that. So don't do what I just did. Bad me. But it's not an actual fallacy yet. So I guess I can do it, but I shouldn't. Wait, what am I? What? Okay. Anyways, teapots, go.
And if not, well, that could be one reason why the existence of God is a different sort of thing than the existence of leprechauns or teapots.
Well, there are some people that believe in the leprechauns and the fae folk, but they haven't necessarily codified that into writings, or if they have, nobody's paid that much attention to them. But that doesn't mean that it's false, does it? Just because people aren't paying attention to an idea doesn't make it false, right? Just because it hasn't received scholarly attention doesn't make it false, right? So your appeal to scholarship is invalid.
If billions of people claim that they had experiences with leprechauns or teapots, that would be a different thing than just.
Okay, so now it's an appeal to population or popularity. Wow. So it has to be X number of people that I mean, come on. It's just,
proposing some random thing exists for the sake of really trying to ridicule a certain belief. So that's why I don't.
Stop ridiculing my belief. My poor belief. It can't withstand ridicule. Deacon Ferdinand was so mean to me. He ridiculed my belief. Unsophisticated atheist, meanie. Suck a lemon. Get over yourself. It's not ridiculing a belief. It's explaining to you that you have the burden of proof, you nitwit. Also, your argument sucks on top of you being a nitwit. Because you could be a nitwit and have a good argument, but you don't have a good argument and you're a nitwit, which is an ad hominem. I shouldn't call you a nitwit, but I'm gonna anyways. Nitwit. All right. Okay, I'm not. I should really not do that. I apologize. Nitwit.
Don't find these arguments all that convincing. Yeah, and there aren't you wouldn't necessarily say that leprechauns result from the result of logical arguments in the same way that the existence of God can follow from logical arguments.
Actually, I could replace all arguments for God with leprechaun and they still don't work. I mean, they still work as well as the argument for God works because God is a leprechaun. Now, actually, I personally don't do that because I don't believe in leprechauns, but only because the leprechauns are not supported by the Lobsterist. Now, the Lobsterist has 4 books. If you haven't heard of the Lobsterist yet, you got to read it. I mean, you haven't examined it. So you don't know about it. You don't know if it's true or false until you check it out. So you might be saying, well, how do I check that out, Deacon Ferdinand? I'm so glad that you asked. Okay, here's what you do. Yes, I'm wasting time doing this, damn it. I'm going to do it until somebody I want someone out there to debunk all the Lobsterists, damn it. Okay. Sorry. I'm okay. Okay. So let's see. I don't know if that. Now, see, the problem is if I do that, then I don't know if that is showing. And then how do I okay, I want to show this. Okay. So my description on my about page, right, says logic, and sometimes lobsters. Then it has my blog. And then it says become a lobsterist. So if you go to this link, right, which you have to copy and paste because it's not like a link you can click on because, I don't know, Google, YouTube doesn't, whatever. Anyways, you go there, you can read the first lobster. Then there's the new lobsterist, which is this. And then this is BC, the holiest lobsterist, which is that one. Did I say there was 4 lobsterists? If I did, never mind. Back to the anyways, read it.
So I just don't see how this is a fair comparison and has any actual evidential weight other than really trying to just make a mockery of theism.
Oh no!
And also I'd say, yeah, it begs the question in favor.
Oh no! Don't make a mockery of theism. No. I'm sorry. It's just I'm being very immature now. I apologize. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna keep doing it, but I'm also going to apologize for doing it. Oh no, theism. It begs the question in favor of naturalism. No, it doesn't. That's not Russell's Teapot's about. What? How wrong can a person be about what Russell's Teapot is? Apparently very is the answer. He's very wrong about Russell's Teapot. He really doesn't like the burden of proof, I guess. Anyways.
Of naturalism. It assumes naturalism is true and then just puts all the stuff that wouldn't be explained by naturalism in the same boat. And I hope that's easy to see, right? It's like, well, you don't believe in other things that we wouldn't expect under naturalism. So why do you believe this thing? And you can say, well, because I don't believe in naturalism. So I don't put all these things in the same category. And
Yeah, but why do you believe in something that is unverifiable, unfalsifiable, and unprovable? Because that's what supernatural is. It's a category that people have made up, as far as I can tell. It is akin to magic. In fact, magic and miracle basically has the same definition, just about. Both are non physical things that cannot be studied by science. Magic works, but you can't study it. You can't prove that it's a thing. Works under certain conditions, not others. And plenty of people will claim that they've, you go to India, there will be at least 100 plus, however many people, that will claim that their guru has levitated. And you can probably go and watch the guru levitate. And by God, some of them actually levitate off the ground. But what's weird about this, and if you're a skeptic like I am, you might ask some questions like, why is the guru near a big curtain? Why can't I go around the guru, like to the back of him? Why is he only levitating inside this tent? Why isn't he levitating outside of the tent? Why can't we put the guru in a clear box with holes in it and watch him levitate in there? Why can't we test this at all? Well, because that would ruin the magic. Because the guru doesn't have magic. It's, it's ropes and pulleys or some sort of device under the ground that's pushing him up, or a bunch of his people are picking him up. Or sometimes what's really amazing is the guru will not move an inch off the ground, but his followers will say that he did levitate. And you'll be like, but I was there. I didn't see him levitate. And they'll be like, oh, wow, I saw it. And everybody will agree with them that they saw it. Even though you can record it and show that he's not levitating, they'll say, no, he is. That's the power of magical thinking. So it's not my problem that you're saddled with that. That's your problem. It's a feature, not a bug. Wait, no, it's the other way around.
And I reject the premise that, if I believe in God, I would have to believe in leprechauns and magic teapots and things. I think that's, once again, just presupposing that naturalism is true and all these other things are false.
No, it's not. But why wouldn't you believe in leprechauns and magical teapots? God could make those things real. So why wouldn't God make those things real? There's nothing that God couldn't do. Under God, all things are possible. He never proved the things that he claimed that, or did he? He did do the thing about the natural things they thought weren't explained by naturalism. He did cover that, okay, but he did not demonstrate the supernatural being a category at all, and he didn't demonstrate a whole bunch of other things. And you know what's really interesting? He didn't give an argument for his God in this video, so he didn't offer even an argument for God. So all he did was complain that people say that there's no evidence of God, and by evidence he means arguments, and then he didn't present a single argument for God. Good job. Well done.
So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you found this video interesting.
Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah. Let me know in the comments if you think all such arguments for God fail, and
they do.
Given a response to Plantinga's arguments, I'd be curious to hear what they are.
Plantinga's arguments.
Haven't looked at that paper in a while, but I'll provide a link there.
Okay.
Anyway, have a good one.
Oh, you haven't even looked at the paper in a while? Oh, okay. No, I'm not going to address Plantinga's arguments because I don't give a shit what the hell they say. Like I said, I have my argument against Yahweh specifically. If Plantinga's not arguing for Yahweh specifically, then it doesn't matter for your theology. So I'm going to click on the argument, I guess. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, shit. Alvin Plantinga. What the fuck? Who is this guy? Let's see. American philosopher. Alvin Karl Plantinga is an American analytic philosopher who works primarily in fields of philosophy or religion. In other words, he does stuff that doesn't matter in the real world. He's got epistemology and logic. He actually does logic? Oh, that's interesting. In 1963 to 1982, he taught at Calvin University before accepting appointment as the professor of philosophy of Notre Dame. He is fucking 90 years old. So fucking old, dude. Okay. Cool. Let's see. Where's the syllogism? Oh my god. Oh my god. He's got a lot of text. Where's your syllogism? Just give me your syllogism. Oh my god. I'm sorry. I have the wrong thing on the screen. You don't see what I'm seeing right now. Hold on a second. Okay. Now you see what I'm seeing. Okay. All right. Where's your syllogism? Give me your fucking syllogism. Where's the fucking syllogism? Oh my god, I'm not gonna read through. Just give me a syllogism. Oh my goodness. No. 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 This is no. Oh. Why is it? Is this an essay format? Oh my god. How many words do you need? Oh, so many words. Ontological argument. Nailed it. I called it. I remember I said it was going to be in there. No, maybe I didn't. I don't know. The argument from positive epistematic status. The fuck does any of that mean? Help! What is it? The argument from positive epistematic status. Whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what the hell those words are. Oh my god! This goes on forever. It's a bunch of words, though. Oh, look, moral arguments. I did call that one. Called it. Blah, blah, blah. Boy, it's possible for humans to write a bunch of stuff about nothing. And he's actually got some notes. Okay, that's nice. Yeah. Wait. The same holds for Christian. Oh, maybe he is arguing for a Christian God. Let's see. What makes an argument a good one? How about it being valid and sound? Let's see, but he didn't present any syllogisms in here, so I'm kind of pissed off about that because that means I have to read this damn thing, and I'd rather read just a little syllogism because that makes me happy. So I'm not gonna analyze this. Screw that. No, fuck that stuff. Fuck that nonsense. All right, now I'm swearing. It's been 2 hours. That's okay. He's not listening to this anyways. Do we think that Thinking Christian will listen to my entire 2-hour video? Do we think that? Does anybody think that? Raise your hands if you think that. Actually, don't raise your hands because I wouldn't be able to see if you did. So post in the comments why Russell's Teapot is not assuming naturalism and also whatever else about, and then so next time on Deconverted Man, tune in and I'll be a lobster and you can't prove wrong. So there. Thanks for watching. Buy my books. I'll link to my books if I remember. I'm too lazy to do it. Screw it. I don't care. I'm not going to link to anything for now, this time. Unless you really want me, and you can ask me in the comments, then I'll link it, maybe. And then, I'm going to turn this thing off now. It's been fucking 2 hours. Swearing. I blame Calsana 789. I'm not even sure that's how you say their name. I've never seen them before. Welcome to my thing. This is the thing that I do. I yell at people, and then I go insane. This is the part where I go insane. Get off the thing, you nitwit! Oh, okay, that's my producer telling me to end the broadcast. Goodbye!